I am going to be giving out a number of handouts throughout the shiurim. The first handout I'm giving out today, we are not going to read it in class. It's homework.
I said you're all handouts.
Thank you. The reason I am giving this out is this is an excerpt from the book that an Israeli colleague, okay, has written, and the book the article talks about the letters that have been written by soldiers in the current conflict who have not been able to return home. And I find that it's not a long article, but I think it's very meaningful to help us relate not simply to the current situation in Israel and Eretz Israel, but in particular to what we want to talk about in our sessions together. Okay? What would prompt a soldier to write a letter to his family on the supposition that he might not come home from war? And I think that's in essence what it's going to talk about in that piece. And I think it puts what we're going to be learning about in more than just an academic framework. And that's really part of the purpose that I hope to have us appreciate what we're learning. So, as I said, theoretically, I'd like to have you read it at home, and then that put a mindset into what we're going to be learning. So today I'm going to just start off with a discussion of basically what are we going to be studying? What are we going to be talking about? What is an ethical will? It happens that back in 1983, two individuals, Jack Greene and Nathaniel Stamford, they produced a book. The title of the book was Ethical Wills, a Modern Jewish Treasury. And in the introduction to that book, they attempt to convey what is the concept of something we call in English an ethical will. Otherwise, it's known as a tzava, or tzvaos, right? And it may mean will, it may mean instruction, it may mean a statement. Okay? And in their introduction, they phrase it this way: how one generation seeks to pass on to another generation. As with material possessions, parents often conveyed the ethical inheritance during their lifetime. Deeply cherished was the desire to bequeath to their descendants an instructive account of the ideals and the midot, the traits or the measures of refinement closest to their hearts. They sought to write and transmit not philosophical treatises, but personal reflections on their lives as Jews and on the motivating values and events in their life experience. They hoped to impart the precepts of Hashem's law, and they did not put Hashem, I'm reading that into there. They used God's law, refracted through the prism of the parent's life. These documents, let's call it for the moment that way, some are letters, some might be called wills, some testaments, really are far more than ethical treatises. They are lessons that a parent seeks to impart to a child that reflects the parent's life experience as well as the morals and the values inherent in Jewish life. Many will come, at least some of the samples that I'm going to be sharing with us, will come from rabbis and scholars. And that variety, okay, is going to have a special subcategory, a special name in a moment. Okay? But all others clearly come from what we'll call average Jews, both men and women. Okay? Those that come from rabbinic origin, rabbinic sources, have a special name called Hanhagot. Not sure the best way to translate that other than maybe directives. Okay? Right? But I want us to keep that subcategory. Yeah.
Well, if you're raising children and you have their entire life to teach them, why are you waiting until you die to?
Good question.
What was
So
the question?
why wait till you're close to death to try to share with them the values that's important? That's where we're going to see that not all of them were at the end of one's life. Okay? So that's a good question because it tells us that there were times when an individual excuse me, would want to share their values, okay, and their experience, okay, under other circumstances. And we'll see the connection, understand it then with what I just gave out to you to read.
Excuse me, was Rambam's letter to the Yemenite Han Hagat?
Was that a Hanhaga? That's a good question. Okay, whether that would be put in this category, sorry, or whether it would be put into as an ethical treatise or a halachic response. Sorry. Right, but that's an important point. It wasn't necessarily left to the end of one's life. Okay? Now, we can assume that the Hanhagot variety, okay, if they're written by rabbis or by scholars, okay, might very well contain citations from the Torah, from other parts of the Tanakh, other parts of the Bible, from parts of the Gemara, for example. All of those are possible. Those in particular, and that's why they're sort of a separate subcategory, is because they weren't always directed towards family. Sometimes they were directed towards a community. Sometimes they were directed specifically to the congregation of the individual. Okay? And so the other variety, we'll call it the more popular ones, those tend to be seen more as an opportunity for insight into the family life in the early Middle Ages and in the Middle Ages. So from that point of view, we get a sense of what family Jewish practices were. Okay, if a rabbi writes to his daughters, for example, that I want you to always behave in a matter of the highest tzniut, the highest levels of modesty, are we going to consider that they didn't? No. Okay, but that he wants them to say he's setting a standard for them. Okay, but that applies also for the Jewish community at that time. In this way, as I said, many ethical wills are important historical documents, because not only do they emphasize the ethical values expected of the following generation in a certain location, but they also transcend geographical boundaries. Now, coming back to our initial source. Okay, I mentioned that their book, okay, was called Ethical Wills, a Modern Jewish Treasury. Right? What does that seem to imply? That there must have been something on that topic produced earlier, okay? Which we're going to get to in a moment. Okay? But I want us to understand that this is a, so to speak, unique subcategory of what we would call in general Musa, ethical literature. But it's different, particularly from what we would normally think of Musa, of ethical literature, and that we're going to talk about in another session. Okay, some of the other examples of Jewish ethical literature. So where did Reamer and Stamford derive this idea? What did they base it on? Okay, because they were not the first ones to explore this kind of area. Okay, they based it on a much earlier book that was written by a Jewish scholar, okay, from England years back, okay, named Israel Abraham. And he actually produced a 2-volume book called Hebrew Ethical Wills. And that was originally published in 1926, probably before at least some of us were around. Right? But, okay, nevertheless, the book was republished in 1976, okay, with a new introduction by a more contemporary scholar, okay, namely Judah Golden, with additional notes and bibliography. And the source material, as I said, we'll be looking at will be primarily the English translations of those documents. Okay? Now, it's interesting to note that the Golden in his commentary, okay, to that book, decided to give us an introduction also to what was the concept of these documents, these 12. Okay? And he says, for example, one variety, particularly associated with rabbinic authors, we've designated Hanhagot, directives regarding practical daily worship, okay, and life. They might include citations from certain classical, ethical, and moralistic texts that we all have heard of. Pirkei Avos, for example, Ethics of the Fathers, or Avos to Rabbi Nassim, okay? The Fathers according to Rabbi Nassim. They also, again, might include sources from certain sections of the Gemara that we may be somewhat less familiar with, okay, like Derech Eretz Rabbah and Derech Eretz Zuta. Okay, those are smaller sections. Okay? But again, in this explanation, this introduction, he says, remember that these are not similar to what we would consider ethical or moral literature that was produced in certain times of Jewish history. What times are we talking about? One would be the Spanish Muslim period. Okay? And again, I'll throw out the name of one or two books that people may have heard of. Ibn Pakuta's Duties of the Heart. Okay. Schovot HaLevavot. Okay. Saadia Gaon's Book of Doctrines and Beliefs. Exactly. And Maimonides' 8 chapters. Shmona Pratim. Okay. On the other hand, he said there was another period in Jewish history where ethical writing was very significant. Okay, that period we would call basically from the 12th to the 13th century in Europe. It's known as Hasidei Ashkenaz. Okay? Or Ashkenaz, Hasidei, others want to call it the German Pietists movement. Okay? So all of these might be examples, okay, of periods of time where ethical literature became very predominant, okay, and was heavily studied. And that's not to say that they're still not studied today. In most yeshivas, and certainly in Eretz Yisrael, and it could be here in the States as well, okay, in the morning, they would start off usually with a Gemara Shiur, a class in Talmud, at a certain time in the morning, giving the students time to prepare in advance, but in between the time that the students would prepare and the time that the Rebbe would give his shiur, there would be a half hour, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, depending on the yeshiva, where they would study, for example, Kovot Halavavot, duties of the heart, ethical texts, sort of to put you in the mood, if you will, okay? But what I do want to add, given these examples of specific time periods where ethical literature was significant, was the fact that throughout this whole time period, that doesn't mean that other texts of ethical literature were not studied or known. Where was that based on? Again, we can point to a time period, okay, and to personalities. If we compare it to the community of Sfat, okay, and the influence there of kind of Kabbalistic ethical movement, right? And there too, we find major texts that came out. For example, one called Tomer Devorah, the Palm Tree of Deborah, by Moshe Cordovero. Okay? Or another one, Reshit Chachma, the Beginning of Wisdom, by Elijah de Vidas. Or Sefer HaCharedim, by Book of the Pious, by Elazar Azikri. Okay? So again, the same community that produced, for example, Lecha Dodi, that we say every Friday night, was the same community that also produced significant ethical literature as well. Okay? Now, while we've mentioned that, I don't want us to think that because we mentioned the example in Eretz Yisrael, or we mentioned an example in Ashkenaz, in Germany, okay, that this ethical tendency was only limited to a significant geographic area. That's really not the case. It was based on wherever Jews were living, okay? Whether it's Eretz Yisrael, okay, or other locations, whether it's during the rabbinic period or during the medieval period. Okay, but remember, Jews were also living in North Africa. Okay? They were besides in Eastern Europe. So again, we need to keep in mind that this was not limited to, say, Ashkenazim, or not limited to Sephardim. Okay? Both groups had major individuals who produced literature of this variety. Okay? Some of whom were leading authorities in Jewish law, and others of lesser authority, lesser familiarity, really. Some were men, some were women, some, as the question was asked, were written near death, some were confessions, some were written much earlier, providing guidance and wisdom to one's children, meaning its sons and daughters, and how to conduct their lives. Okay? What actually may surprise us as we start beginning to look at texts is that those who study this material from a more, let's say, academic point of view, and not a spiritual, religious point of view, suggests, and that's what we're going to ask. Really, the first question: where did this begin? Where could we say was the initial concept of ethical will? Anyone want to give an answer? Suggest. Sal? Okay.
He lets them know what he thinks of them. Well, what would you say?
Okay.
Lets them know what he thinks of them.
Okay. You're suggesting, and we're going to touch on that momentarily. Okay, that in Bereshit, okay, in Genesis, where he talks to each of the sons, right? That's what you're suggesting. Yehuda, etc., Reuben, etc., etc.
No, I meant, excuse me. I meant Yaakov.
That's what I meant to you, right?
Flip of the tongue.
Okay.
I was thinking kind of the reverse. I was wondering why nothing came to my mind. I could be missing, obviously, but I'm not aware of Abraham or Yitzhak or even Yaakov giving what I think we consider an ethical will. But that was with Yaakov. He was the person say he wanted to tell him about the end of the days. He left him, so he told him about what's going to be happening with them. That's different from what you aspire that they would, behave toward.
Okay.
So to me, I'm wondering why there isn't anything.
All right.
That's at least obvious. Me.
Okay. Good point.
I thought about a small extent. Okay, so he told Israel, but by that he also told them of the Geulah. So it's like a double thing. You pick me up from here and at the Geulah time, so it's like a double type of.
But is that a directive as to how they should behave?
With regard to his bones.
Actually, I'm going to retract a little bit of what I said because I think that's an interesting point, but I would take it back earlier. Yaakov gave the instruction that he wants them buried in Israel, and although it's not a clear directive of an ethical will of what they should do, it's demonstrating to them the importance that he attached to return and burial to Israel, to presumably send that message to his children.
Okay.
I want to also say Yaakov, from Yaakov, but a little different twist. Before he died, his children said to him, Shema Israel, you Israel, listen, after you die, don't worry, Hashem, we will continue. We will believe in Hashem, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Don't worry that we will, you know what I mean? That different. So that's another way of putting it.
Okay, but that is a response to what Yaakov said. Now that's Midrash also, remember.
Okay.
Okay?
Only Dvarim, it says this nicely.
No.
All right, so you're all correct. All right? If one wants to argue that the concept of an ethical will is originally found in the Tanakh, okay, in the Bible, do we say it goes back to the patriarchs, or at least to Yaakov? Okay, that's the issue. Okay, and that's what at least some want to suggest. Okay, but all right, and in fact, in his original introduction to the first book that we said by Abrams, he writes as follows. Okay, the Bible records several such instances. And here now he's going to throw out some, and I want you to think, do I agree with that or I don't agree with it? And prominently among these may be mentioned the blessing of Jacob, okay? The dying requests of Joseph to his brethren. Okay? Both of those have been raised. The address of Moses and Joshua to the people of Israel. the advice of David to his son Solomon. So that's how Abrams argues that it's possible, citing these biblical examples, to theoretically say that ideally ethical wills began all the way back. Right? But what do we got to do? The best thing we can do is really examine the text, right? And see, would we agree with Abrams in his argument that that's the case? Okay? So that's what we're going to do. That's what we passed on.
I think Birkat Yaakov was description of the son's character, not so much as the
Right?
direction of the
Okay.
children.
Right. So if that's the case, then you would disagree with him. Right? Okay, in that particular case. Okay, that he's talking about them, all right, but he's not necessarily giving them directives as to how they should continue to lead their life.
He's describing their character.
Okay. So,
But there are other proportions who say that what he's actually doing is he's telling them what their nachala will be when they return to Israel.
okay. So let's see what we can discover in the handout. Okay, we'll look at that a little bit, and then we'll discuss more. Okay? If you want to use a Tanakh at the same time, you're welcome to do so. This is all based in Breshit in Genesis chapter 49. Okay? Okay. And let's look at the first example from Psachim. All right, that I share with you on the Twitter. As Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, and Jacob called his sons and said, gather around and I will tell you what will occur to you in the end of days. What the future is going to be like. Okay? Jacob wanted to reveal to his sons when the complete redemption would arrive at the end of days. But the divine presence abandoned him. In other words, he could not get any kind of a clear picture. Okay? Why? Because heaven forfend, one of my descendants is unfit, as with the case of my grandfather Abraham, from whom Ishmael emerged, and like my father Isaac, from whom Esau emerged. His son said to him, okay, and that's why I told you it's a midrash, right? Hear Israel, namely our Father, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. They said, just as there's only one God in your heart, so too there is only one in our heart. At that moment, Jacob, our father, said in praise, right? The pasuk, blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever, as all his children will righteous. Okay? So according to Reish Lakish, in this example, it's a prediction of the future. What are they going to become? They attest to the fact that at least in one area, one value, they maintain the same value, the same importance as their father. Okay? But notice he doesn't say to them initially, I want you to be sure to do X, Y, and Z. Okay? Let's look at the next one. That's beautiful. All right? Reshit Rabbah on the bottom of the page. This is what their father Jacob spoke to them. It is not written here, but rather their father. Another man like me is destined to bless you. And from the place that I concluded, he will begin. As it stated, this is what the father spoke. When Moses stood, he began with this, as it is stated. This is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. So notice in Breshit Rabbah already, we see there's going to be a parallel between one example that Abrams gave, Jacob, and the other example, another one that he gave regarding Moshe. Jacob said to them, I will say these blessings to you. When will they take effect? When you receive the Torah. This is the Torah, that is, this is what their father spoke to them. With that which their father concluded, in blessing them over in the next top of the next side, Moses began blessing them. I gain insight from the elders, for I uphold your edicts. Isaac, when he blessed Jacob, said to him, God Almighty will bless you. Citing the passage. With what did he conclude? Isaac summoned Jacob. Jacob began from where his father had concluded. As it stated, Jacob summoned his sons, and he concluded when he blessed them with this. This is what their father spoke to them. Moses began from where Jacob concluded. This is the blessing. With what did Moses conclude? Happy are you. David too, when he came to recite a psalm. Okay, notice again, a third example in this midrash that are listed in what Abraham suggested as in his introduction as earlier biblical example. Okay? That is, I gained insight from the elders. They came to the threshing floor of Atad, that is beyond the Jordan, and they lamented a very great substantial lament there and observed mourning for the father. Okay. Now, at this point, I want to pause for a second. Okay, we haven't really seen what I'm going to call direct ethical imperatives, okay, given, okay, to the son. It could be a prophecy in the midrash here. It could be a statement that of agreement with the, let's call it, basic Jewish value and principle of faith. That's one thing, but it's not that he's sort of conveying to them so far. So it made me question, was Israel Abrams correct in pointing to this example? Okay, and so when I wanted to look at the commentaries, okay, some of them are farshing, okay, would they back up my view? That, okay, or would they back up Abraham's view? Okay, that these were good biblical sources to point to the initial concept of ethical guilt. So let's look for a moment at Ibn Ezra. Okay, in the middle of the page. That which shall befall you. Again, Ibn Ezra is very direct. Prophecies foretelling that which shall befall you in the future. Those who base themselves on Scripture's closing remark, and this is that their father spoke unto them and blessed them, and conclude that they're Jacob's words of blessings, make a mistake. For if it were so, where are the blessings of Reuben, Shimon, and Levi? How come you're going to bless some of the sons and not others? How come you're going to give only directives to some and not others? The way to understand, and this is that their father spoke unto them and blessed them, is as follows. And this is what their father spoke unto them by way of prophecy, after which he blessed them. Scripture omits the blessing.
But that's not true, because when it says Reuven b'choriyat pachas kamaim al tutar, it wasn't a prophecy, it was a statement how Reuven is.
A description of his personality.
You're correct, so it's not a prophecy, it's a description.
Okay, all right, so that is basically saying, I'm not sure that the example of Jacob is a good, valid example, excuse me, of an ethical will, of a tzavah. Okay, let's look at another example, real quick. Cheskuni, what is going to happen to you? Here Yaakov intends to foretell. Again, prophecy, right? Asher yikra echem, the future. These were not meant to be blessings, as we do not find that he blessed Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. When the Torah writes, etc., okay, and then on to up to the top, this is what their father said. We have to understand the verse. This is what he foretold them. The details of the blessing were not spelled out. So far, okay, what it seems to me, okay, at least from those two examples that we saw, okay, and if we want to look at others, right, that many of the commentaries, at least on the chapter, identify the remarks as possible prophecy or the part of Jacob regarding the future times of the Messiah. Okay, and thus a number of the sources that Israel Abrahams wants to point to as origins for ethical wills could be questioned. Right? If you want to say it's predicting, that's one thing. If it's presenting blessings and warnings to each son as the future. Okay? On the other hand, let's take another example that we came up with Joseph. Okay? I'm not sure that I would agree with Abraham's assessment even of Joseph's remarks to his brothers. He argues in Bereshit, in Genesis chapter 45, where Joseph talks to his brother. Again, he suggests that that could be an example. Yeah. But there is another example I do want us to think about, okay, that we've seen already presented. Okay? Or at least two more if we can get it in together. Okay? When Moshe speaks to the nation, we're talking now Devarim, Deuteronomy chapters 29, 30, and 31. Okay? And I think Abrahams was focused particularly on Devarim chapter 31, since the concept of an ethical will, okay, could easily be identified as a parallel to a kind of end-of-life testament, speaking to one's listeners, whether it be the family, whether it be the community, or in this case, the nation, one who attempts to direct, okay, to encourage them following a certain path or a certain direction. Okay? And there clearly we see in chapter 31 of Devarim, okay, there, where Moses addresses it not only to Joshua, okay, but who, remember, is his designated heir, okay, but also to rest of the people, that there he's looking to him to become a model, okay, and that may be closer to the concept of what an ethical will, okay, would be defined.
Why should we take one example from Sefer Dvarim? The whole book of Dvarim is basically his last speech of Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is an ethical directive, the whole book.
Okay, so you would expand, okay, that idea, and you would agree that that would be a valid example. Okay, all right. Let's look now at one other place. Okay, and this is an example not from the Torah, but from Malachim. Okay, that should be the last page. Excuse me, in the handout. Okay. Okay. This is from Malachim, as I marked there, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Okay, which find, okay, David's remarks to Solomon. Okay, so let's look at this one in a moment. Okay. Vayikrevu Yemei David Lamut, Vayitzav et Shlomo b'no lemor. When David's life was drawing to a close. But here's clearly an example of an end-of-life statement. Perhaps we could point out parallel to Moshe, it's the end of his journey, the end of his mission, when he gave much of the remarks in Sefer Devarim. Anochi holech b'derech kol haaretz v'chazakti v'hayiti la'ish. I'm going the way of all the earth. You will be the man in charge if you act with determination. What is he telling Shlomo in this case? Keep the charge of the eternal Yosef God, walking in God's ways, following God's laws, commandments, rules, and admonitions as recorded in the teaching of Moses, in order that you may succeed in whatever you undertake and whatever you do. Now that clearly is a directive. Okay? Goes on. Then God will fulfill the promise that was made concerning me. Okay? Namely, reflecting back on his own life. Okay? If your descendants are scrupulous in their conduct and walk before me faithfully with all their heart and soul, your line on the throne of Israel shall never end. That was the promise God gave to me. You follow the directive, you follow the program, so to speak. Okay, that will continue for you too. Further, you know that Joab, son of Truya, did to me what he did to the two commanders of Israel's forces, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether. He killed them, shedding blood of war in peacetime, staining the girdle of his loins and the sandals on his feet with blood of. And you know what he did. What's the message underlying here? Revenge. Okay? Is that a directive?
Yeah.
Clearly. Okay? So act in accordance with your wisdom. Okay? And Hebrew is Dai Hakima Baramiza. Okay? A hint sometimes is stronger than a stating it out loud. Right? So act in accordance with your wisdom and see that his white hair does not go down to Sheol in peace. Okay? Clearly. But deal graciously with the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, for they befriended me when I fled from your brother Absalom. Let them be among those that eat at your table.
It doesn't sound very ethical to me. Yes.
Cool.
You don't expect it out of the.
Right? You don't?
Yeah, yes, we do, but not after you read
The same David who had a little event with Bathsheba.
Oh, it's okay, it's forgiven a long time.
All I'm saying is, put it in the context. I'm not going to disagree that it seems problematic, but it is an ethical will. It is a last will and testament giving direction as to how I want you to proceed in the future. Okay? Different from what we saw with Yaakov, with Jacob. There he was telling him, in the future this, or this describes you and that, and things like that. Okay, but here, what we say again in French, actually it's Yiddish, Tuchasaf and Tish.
I never heard
Okay?
that.
You know what that means?
I never heard that.
Something on the table.
Okay.
I never heard.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Put yourself in gear. Okay? Okay. There's no direct Hebrew translation of that piece either. At least not that I'm aware
I
of.
understand.
Right?
I said, I don't know.
Okay? But I want us to begin to see what happens. All right? Let's just finish this up a little bit, given our timing. You must deal with, again, got cut off a little bit. So-and-so, the son of Gerah, the Adad, etc., insulted me outrageously when I was on my way to Machanayim, but he came down to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by God, I will not put you to the sword. Okay? So do not let him go unpunished. For you are a shrewd man, and you will know how to deal with him and send his gray hair down to Sheol and rest. So David rested with his ancestors, and he was buried in the city of David. Yeah.
I find all of these wanting. Maybe it's because I have a concept of natural will that perhaps is not what you're thinking of. But I think more in terms of the Igeris Haramban and trying to impart to one's children or whomever a way of life, how to conduct oneself in life. And when you go back even to Moshe Rabbeinu, the parsha starts off results habracha shevirach Moshe's Bnei Israel Bnei Moshe. So that it's a bracha that's I view that sort of akin to Yaakov with his children.
Right.
It's not necessarily telling them how to conduct themselves. Clearly, Moshe at a number of places, I think, tells Bnei Israel to follow Hashem's ways. I mean, you can just go to Shlomo HaMelech in Koheles, and the end he says, Esvalokim Yira, Yesmitzvot Shmar, Zeh Kol Adam. I mean, one could say, in that will, just follow Hashem's ways. But that's too broad.
Exactly.
So to me, the natural will should impart specific forms of conduct. And I don't view David's instructions to Shlomo as fulfilling that, because they strike me as just, these are some things I want you to take care of. You know, sort of like, when I die, bury me here, and I want these people to be the pallbearers. These are instructions given, as opposed to imparting how to conduct one's life.
Okay. All right. So what you've done is you pointed out the point that we tried to make. Of course, is that when Israel Abrams argues that we could see biblical models of an ethical will, he may be correct. We might point to Moshe. We might point to David. Okay? But that is not necessarily what I'll put it this way, what the flow of ethical wills became. Okay? So in other words, the concept of stating something as directives to the next generation is found here, to the community, to family, things like that. So from that point of view, we will agree with Israel Abrahams in terms of his introduction. But we'll put a limit on it in saying that, on the other hand, when we're going to get to other sources of rabbinic examples, okay, or other examples that are from medieval periods, okay, then we're going to see that we might have a better grasp, I'll put it that way, of what has become the flow, I can put it that way, of what ethical wills actually turned into. Okay? So saying something to your children before you die, you want to be buried here, or I want you to do this. Okay, that may not be in our framework of a quote ethical will. Okay, that might be more in terms of another kind of testament. But as we're going to look at examples from 2 or 3 in the next session, we're going to look at examples from early and later rabbinic examples in the next session. We're then going to see that begins to come and present a model, okay, of what eventually became, I'll put it another way, the standard of what an ethical will would be. Okay? So while in a sense we've tried to show, that this idea of speaking before one's death, or speaking before at a certain point in time, and declaring directives, okay, to a next generation or community, or the entire people in a sense, okay, is certainly there, right? Then we proceed further with standards. when you read the article that I gave out, you'll see, and I afterwards will come back next week. I'd be interested to see to what degree you think these would be ethical wills or simply the statements of individuals in situations that they know if I don't come back, what guidance can I give? All right, thank you, everybody.
I got you.
Focus. Everything's fine.
I tried it again myself this morning, got no.
Just gonna put my stuff together.
Yes.
Andrew has to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, the one that you did here last year, that was the cigarette.
Yes, I haven't thought of any more.
Ah, okay. When you have the new one.
Thank you. I haven't.
Yeah.
What? Okay, thank you.
No, it's not. It's not.